Welcome to the Inside Track on Real Estate with the Decker team. I'm Yetta Decker.
And I'm Ken Decker. And together we make the Decker team.
Along with some other great professionals that are part of the team as well.
Absolutely. Today we're going to talk about inspections, right?
We are.
Yes. And why are we talking about inspections? Because during our buyer workshop, we covered the 8 pitfalls that buyers may happen. And one of those is not getting the right inspection. So we'd like to talk extensively about those types of inspections. So we don't necessarily get time to do all of them at our buyer workshop.
Right, and it's really, there's so many traps that a buyer can fall into, and so that's what our workshop is all about. So if you're interested at any point in learning about them, all of them, because today we're only covering the one, you can join us on the third Thursday of the month at our One Antares office. Pre-registration is required, so you'd simply call our office at 613-860-4663, wouldn't you, Ken?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so now let's talk about some of the pitfalls, or the pitfall of not getting the right inspections. And the right inspections changes depending on the home you're buying. So you really need a guide. You need a trustworthy guide to help you through that process, depending on the house you're buying, where you're buying it, how old it is. There may be different pitfalls to look for. And as a real estate agent who's had together, we've had like 40 decades.
40 decades?
40 decades, a long time. 4 decades of experience of going through home inspections with a trained and qualified home inspector and noticing what kind of defects or problems may come out of those inspections and what to look for.
Right. So it is really important that we're going to give you a huge list of potential inspections today and different things you want to look for. Don't feel overwhelmed by it though, because you wouldn't necessarily be doing all of them. Initially, when we begin the process, we would select 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 inspections initially, and then the additional inspections would be booked if in fact there was some evidence indicating that we would want to go a little deeper in certain areas.
So the general home inspector would give some indication of, maybe we should have a furnace inspection, or we should have an electrical inspection done, or maybe we should have a mold inspection done, or radon gas, one of multitudes of different further inspections based on their general look at the house.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So today we're going to talk about those different minor inspections and exactly what they're looking for.
So we'll start with one of the individual inspections, and that would be a potential radon gas. And also, I guess there could be air quality inspections. But Ken, let's specifically talk about radon gas and how that would, where that would be and why we would even be talking about that.
Well, radon gas is it's a colorless, odorless gas. You can't tell it's there. It has been linked with cancer, with creating cancer in the body. And it's actually gas that leaks out of cracks in rock. So typically, if you're building in an area that's sandy, you're building it on sand, you're probably not going to do a radon gas test. If you're in the Canada area, maybe you're on part of the Canadian Shield there where they've cut up the rock or blasted rock to put the basements in, you might want to do a radon gas check there. And most of the time, the exterior of the building, like the foundation, as well as the slab of the floor, stops radon gas from coming in. But if there are cracks in that, it could allow that gas into your home. And there's a fairly simple test. It's a little pot that you put in the basement in a couple different areas. You open it up. It's a specific amount of time it needs to be opened. And then they close it up, send it to a lab, and they measure for the amount of radon gas. It costs, a few $100s or whatever. But it's peace of mind. If you're concerned that that area may have some radon gas issues, it's well worth doing.
Right. And then what about tests for other types of air quality or concerns that way, even mold or mildews? We've talked about that before, but what sort of inspections or things can I do to determine whether that's a real problem in this particular house, beyond my smell? I mean, if I smell it, I know I've got a problem.
Well, smell and sight are probably the first 2 visible clues to mold, because mold typically, it can be black or gray or
purple.
Purple, you can get purple mold. So there's visual clues for it, and then there's also, if it's in the air, smell clues for mold. Every home has some level of mold, and the thing is, we just don't want it to be too high. So there is an inspection company that can come in And again, they do mold testing. They close up your house. They'll tell you the percentage of molds and the types of molds so that you know whether it's a toxic type or just a regular plain old mold. I'm not a mold expert, so I rely on others to do that. So we'd be looking for evidence of a problem, whether it be a long, there's been a flood and the owner didn't clean it up properly, didn't remove the carpets, didn't remove drywall along the bottom to clean out any moisture issues to prevent the mold. That might be a reason for mold. Houses that have had a crack in the foundation, moisture's gotten in behind the wall and it's been there for a long time, that might be a mold issue. Sometimes leaks in the attic space, and we might actually have mold in the attic, and the inspector's going to notice that when they go up inside to check for insulation levels and check the trusses and check the wood sheathing on the roof to make sure that's not rotted or anything. There's a possibility of finding mold there. And if there is mold there, it's a pretty simple process of cleaning it up, spraying it to kill it, and making sure that the source of the moisture has been removed. Sometimes builders will take a shortcut, or homeowners will take a shortcut, and they might vent a fan for the bathroom and vent it into the attic space instead of venting it right through the roof sheathing to the exterior. So that creates more moisture in the attic space, which is where we don't want moisture. The attic space should be very close to the same temperature and humidity level as the outside is, and there's actually venting for that. Those vents could be plugged up, or the insulation got pushed too far over the eave vents that allow the air to come up and vent out the top vents. So there's all kinds of causes and all kinds of solutions for them, but the nice thing is knowing that it's actually there.
Right. And I guess one of the things that people will do in homes and attics is they'll use it for storage. And the old style attics work really well for that because there's usually floorboards, and you could certainly do that. And then it's not part of your ventilation for your house, but in a contemporary, more current style house, it would be a problem to use your attic for storage.
Right. And talking about attics, sometimes in the attics is where we actually find some other issues, like asbestos or vermiculite, we call it. The government actually had a program to install vermiculite into attic spaces. I don't even remember back when it was 50s, 60s, or whatever it was, to increase the insulation. And vermiculite is an actual
naturally mined product.
Yeah. And it I don't know, looks like little squares, probably.
Well, almost like pebbles. We've got samples at our office if you ever want to see it. We've collected it out of attics over the years. And I guess the challenge for vermiculite isn't so much the vermiculite itself, except some of it has asbestos in it. Now, some of it doesn't. So it was a warm insulation. It was a good insulation. But they found because it was naturally mined, depending on exactly where it was mined, you would end up with asbestos in it. And asbestos is a health hazard and certainly not something that you want to have in your house. Yeah. So there are tests that can be done to verify whether or not your vermiculite has asbestos in it. It's commonly found in attic spaces from the 50s and 60s, where I've often seen them, and into the early 70s even. And so you would have that tested. The trick there is to take samples from throughout the attic space. And even then, you're unfortunately never 100% assured that there is not any asbestos up there because it came in bags. So it wasn't a large...
One section of the mine could have some asbestos in it naturally in the material, and other parts of the mine wouldn't have. So you never know which bag had some asbestos in it.
Exactly. And over the last few years, it's become a bigger concern for insurance companies from a health hazard perspective. So it is one of those things that if you have it, you definitely want to have it tested. If it tests 0, then probably the recommendation is still to remove it and simply put in regular blown-in cellulose insulation today. The cost for removal is much less if it's been rated 0, so there's some value in determining that, right? I think
it's still expensive, though, but it's worth doing. We're finding that vermiculite in the attic or in the walls can actually stigmatize a home a little bit, in that maybe the buyer now is okay with it, but in the future, the next buyer won't be, and so they're going to have to remove it. So our preference is to deal with it right at the time of sale and work out a win-win situation where it actually gets removed, put back in a landfill site where it originally came from, was out of the ground, and blow in new
Right.
insulation.
And then having said that, there's lots of people that are very comfortable with leaving it because untouched and not bothered, it's not a problem. It's in a sealed space. It's away from the living, breathing space of your house. So it really is one of those things that you have to search on your own and really make your own determinant for, because we've had clients view it in all the different areas, right? Or all the different perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Now, asbestos, while we're on the topic of asbestos, is it can be anywhere else as well. It doesn't have to be in vermiculite. They used to use it to wrap pipes with.
Right.
They used it behind heating sources, oil furnaces, and that sort of thing.
Right. So we find it often in basements. And that also technically should be removed professionally.
Right. There's
And
even
definitely wear
some
masks and
shingles.
things.
They were a hard shingle that went on the exterior of a wall. It was like a wall sheathing that was nailed on or whatever. And we're recommending those get removed, because if you drill in them or bang them or whatever, they had asbestos in it, and that could be released into the air. And the problem with asbestos is that it gets lodged in the lungs and it causes infection, which eventually will cause cancer in the lungs.
Or could.
And yeah, it could. And you can't really get rid of it. It's like a very sharp fiber that gets stuck and it can't get out. So. And the body can't break it down or get rid of it.
So you definitely don't want to disturb asbestos if you have some.
Yes.
And if you're going to disturb it, then you want to do it professionally, wearing a mask. And you also really want to look at the guidelines and consider having a professional that does it every day to come and handle the removal and the, just the cleanup of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Another thing that we might run into is electrical.
Yeah.
There's the home inspector will let you know what kind of electricity, well, not what kind of electricity, but what kind of wiring you may have, whether it's breakers or fuses, whether it's properly fused so that the right size breaker is attached to the right size wire, whether you have aluminum wiring. There's a lot of talk about aluminum wire. Yeah. And it actually caused some fires in the 70s when it was installed in the 80s. We've improved the type of connections, and what the Electrical Safety Authority is now saying is that the best thing to do is just pigtail the wires. So what they do is they take a marette and they put on a little short piece of copper wire, attach that to the aluminum, and then attach that to your electrical outlet, which then makes it safer. So aluminum wiring, you don't necessarily have to change all the wiring in the house, but there are ways of making it safe. And we usually recommend, if it hasn't had an Electrical Safety Authority inspection, that's a good thing to do if it has aluminum wiring.
Absolutely. And I guess we still occasionally see knob and tube wiring. That's been around, I guess turn of the century is when that type of wiring was generally used. And so it's still found in homes today. And basically what you want to do there is, most insurance companies are not going to insure it any longer. So it is the kind of thing where you're likely rewiring. It's not just a matter of adding a new piece of copper onto the end or anything. That's usually a complete replacement.
Yeah. And for you young folks out there that have never seen knob and tube wiring, it's pretty exciting. It actually has a knob that the wire wraps around.
A ceramic knob.
And then also a tube that it runs through. When it goes through a joist, they would drill a hole, they put a ceramic tube in, and the wire would go through the ceramic tube. And the beauty with knob and tube wiring, it was very, very safe, because your two lines were actually usually about 10 inches a foot apart. And so there was virtually no chance of a short between the wires. Now our wire is very close, but we have great insulation, so it's actually safer. The problem with knob and tube is they ran very few circuits through a house, because houses at that time when they did this had very few electrical appliances compared to what we have today. And so what people would do in a house is they just tack onto the wires and join and make another outlet. And so they were starting to overload the wires by putting on too many circuits onto it. So that's the big thing with knob and tube. Insurance companies now, they just say, just cut it, disconnect it. You don't necessarily have to pull everything out, but it has to be totally disconnected, and then put in new copper wiring, and you're away to the races. I've seen an old house done recently where the electricians actually come in and they drill little holes for pulling the wires through, and then they patch those little holes. It's not that intrusive. It does cost a bit of money, but well worth taken care of.
Yeah, so you're joining us for the Inside Track today, and we're talking about inspections, many of them, and I think this may have to be a couple of different shows to cover them all because there's quite a list. Anyway, we're happy to have you join us today. It's the Inside Track with the Decker team, and you can view it at 99.1. You can listen there or go to chri.ca or deckerteam.com.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening to this on air, we're actually videotaping it as well, so you can go to our website and see our pretty faces.
At least our faces. So
right.
Other types of inspections that we might have. What about a typical bank appraisal? That would be an inspection. Mm-hmm. How does that work and when does that happen, Ken?
Well, interesting enough, the inspection can happen before or after your financing is approved.
Okay.
And so we actually set up our offer conditional, period, so that it's conditional on the mortgage, but also that we'll have access to the appraisal. Because sometimes when you're putting more down and it's just the bank that is doing the mortgage, they might request an appraisal right near the end. And sometimes the appraisal is just a drive-by appraisal. They drive by, they make sure the house is there, they look at it, and they go, yeah, that's based on the MLS information, that's worth close to what they paid for it, we're good to go. Other times they want to actually have the appraisal person come in, inspect the house, measure it, and do a real formal appraisal.
Right.
Sometimes sellers won't allow that if all your conditions are gone and your inspection are gone. So we always put in a clause that the appraisal may happen before or after the condition is fulfilled.
And that's really important because it can be a deterrent to the home actually selling. So if you said no, even though there wasn't a condition built in, or a term built in for that, then in fact you could stop the sale from taking place because the mortgage company could say, I'm not loaning on that property unless we get access.
Yes.
And so it's not something to be alarmed about. It happens occasionally and we can't specify because it's really dependent on the lender. So no need to be concerned about it. Just be aware that that particular inspection could really happen at any time and the buyer has really no control over it either. It's very much the financial institution, and even their process is not consistent. It seems to shift. And sometimes they didn't think they wanted an appraisal, and then right before moving day, they do. And so not a thing to be worried about, just certainly one more thing to be aware of.
Right. And other things to inspect. Let's talk about country property for a little while, because it's, I like country property. I like selling country property. I like being out in the country. I like city too, but I like a real variety. And there's a couple things that you run into in the country that you're never going to run into in the city.
Well, one would be septics, right? Yeah. So septics would be...
there are some pockets in the city that have septic systems. And your realtor should know those areas because there are some pockets, between Barrhaven and Ottawa proper, there are some pockets that you think would have water and sewer, but they don't.
Right. And in some areas you would have city water but not city sewer or vice versa. So there are villages and communities where it's one or the other or both. So really just something to be aware of and have a realtor that is aware of those particular communities so that you know what to check for. So in relation to a septic inspector, I know that a building inspector generally does not do that. It's an individual inspector. And typically you want somebody that really has a lot of expertise, not necessarily just a pumping company. In the days where we first began doing septic inspections, it was often the company that did the pumping that would come and do a visual inspection of the tank and say, it looks fine. And probably 50% of your issues with septic will be found with a visual inspection in the tank, just by looking at the levels that the tank is operating at and whether you have solids on the liquid side and those kinds of things, what the dividing wall looks like, what the baffles look like. So a lot of that can be found just by doing a visual. However, probably 50% of the challenges and issues in a septic system can only be found by looking in the actual bed area. So that does require a few test holes to be dug and just examining of what material is found and what material isn't found, I guess, when you're looking there. So the details probably at this point aren't so important, just to be aware that if you are purchasing a home in the country or a home in the city that is on septic, that a septic inspection, I would suggest, is even more important, if I had to pick and choose, than a building inspection. Because generally, if we have a septic challenge or something that's not good there, it can be a $25,000 to $30,000 challenge.
$20,000 to $30,000 to put in a new system.
Right.
And sometimes there isn't room on the lot, so you have to remove the old system, and that can add even more cost because you're taking away contaminated soil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so something that you just have to be so aware of when you're purchasing anything that is serviced by a well or by a septic. And often if it's serviced by a septic, then it will also be serviced by a well, although, as I said a minute ago, not always. So well inspections, there are so many different types of wells.
Just a minute. I'd like to back up for a second. Time out. I want to talk about septics more. I know it's an ugly subject and it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it, right? You said they dig holes in the bed. Does that not break the septic system?
Well, they do it beside
So they're exposing the pipes.
Right.
And I like to liken the thought of if you were buying a car and you just did a visual inspection of the tires and you looked at the brakes and that kind of thing, you could get a rough idea whether the car is working right. And digging the holes, the test pits in the field, is more like doing a compression test on the engine. You can actually tell where in the life cycle the field is, because the field is designed to deteriorate or use up its useful life over time as the biomass builds up. Now I've seen 40, 45-year-old septic systems that are like the day they were put in, and I've seen 2- and 4-year-old septic systems that are failed and have to be replaced because they were installed wrong.
So age isn't necessarily an indicator.
Exactly.
Right.
So a good septic inspector who's checking the pipes and the material around them, and the biomass is a black gucky kind of stuff, and the amount of that,
depending on how long it's been there and how thick it is.
The buildup of that tells us where in the life cycle the field is, similar to a compression test on a car. So I just wanted to get that out there because those inspections are not cheap. You might spend $500, $600 to do a septic inspection, but like you said, it's insurance that you're not going to have to spend $25,000 or $30,000 6 months down the road when your toilet doesn't flush anymore.
Exactly, and there's so many different types of septic systems, so I'm sure on a future show we'll do a comprehensive look at septic systems and wells.
Wow, wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, that's fun. But it's certainly what we do every day, and we have taken some additional courses beyond what's offered traditionally in the real estate industry, just to be more aware, so that although we don't pretend to be a septic inspector, we have a great idea of what exactly we're looking at, because it can be one of those most challenging things to have to go back and renegotiate as well, because it's such a huge ticket item.
Yeah. Now the well, there's a couple different tests you can do as well, right?
Yes, there are.
Yeah, so the one...
Depending on the type of well as well.
What kind of wells are there, Yetta?
Well, there's sandpoint wells, there's dug wells, there's drilled wells. I think that's all of them. And the first test we would always do with a well is in fact a water potability test, which is simply ensuring that the water is drinkable and free of bacteria. And so you're not going to get a mortgage without a potability certificate. And it's recommended that several tests are taken, and they're taken a period of time apart. Often a homeowner will take them every 6 months to a year just to know that the water they're drinking is actually healthy and safe to drink. And so it's not a complicated thing. The Ministry of the Environment does the test, plus there's some private facilities that can also test that water. So it just simply needs to be a reasonably recent sample that's on file, and then the mortgage will be able to be obtained. Around the potability. And then in addition to that, of course, there is quality tests, which really starts to be a conversation about what is in the water, what minerals are present, what the makeup, what the hardness is, what the softness is. So many times if we're in the city, we have reasonably hard water just because that's the way the water is set up in the city. In the country, it is a little bit of everything. I'm sure everybody's heard of sulfur water. That's not actually harmful, they say. However, it's very smelly. It smells like rotten eggs. So something that people will treat for. Iron in the water, it can prematurely wear out your appliances and be a challenge that way. So quality tests is something that are not as commonly done during the pre-purchase period. However, they could be if you have specific concerns. Otherwise, you would do it once you move in, right?
I do a quick check, a sniff check of the water, and a check of the toilet will tell you whether it's irony because it'll pick up that redness.
Especially inside the tank.
Inside the tank, exactly. Right. So you can get a rough idea how the water is. The other test that some people are starting to do now is a volume flow test.
Right.
So similar to when they drill a well, the well driller will actually put a pump in and check the recovery rate and how much water goes up and down during that pumping session, how long it takes for it to come back up, and what the recommended pump's volume is, just to make sure everything's set up right. That's fairly expensive, and it's rare now that people are doing that, but it does happen because I have had a client, move in, and 6 months later the well goes dry and they have to drill a new well, which is a $5,000 to $10,000.
Even 15, depending on how deep you have to go and how many, just the whole process of getting that new drilled well. And then there's no guarantees as to the quality of the water when you in fact drill a new well.
So we've been talking for almost 25 minutes, and we've hit less than half of the different types of inspections that could be possible. So obviously we're going to have another show on this. And I see you have something in your hand there.
I do. This is a community newsletter, or so not so much maybe a community newsletter anymore, but a newsletter that we have been producing and publishing for, I guess, 20 years now. It's called The Bearer, and it has...
Let me show the people that are watching on video. I know for you people in Radio Land, you can't see this, but the video people can see our nice newsletter.
Yeah, and certainly that's available to all of you. Simply log on to deckerteam.com. You can register for it there, or email us at info@deckerteam.com, and you can have your monthly copy. It comes out electronically somewhere around the 21st, 22nd of the month, maybe as late as the 23rd, depending on the way the weekend falls. Deadline for submissions is the 20th of every month.
So people can submit to this?
They can. They can provide events or for sale items, want items, all kinds of, whatever you're looking for pretty much can go in the Bearer, and whatever you're looking to sell.
And it's also mailed out to 10,000 homes, correct?
Probably about 12,000 homes now also get it mailed. And so if you're in an area that gets it by mail, then that's certainly available to you as well. So you can reach us at deckerteam.com.
Or chri.ca. You can send it an email to deckerteam@chri.ca if you'd like a question answered, because sometimes we might have sparked an interest or a question about something that's in your home that you would like to ask us about. We'd love to answer that on air.
Absolutely.
And all you got to do is send us an email at deckerteam@chri.ca, or you can phone us if you want an immediate answer. Call us at 613-860-4663. And we really thank you for joining us today.
On the Inside Track.
Yes, with the Decker team.
Have a good one.
Bye for now.